Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for coming to our studio in Yerevan. Let me just congratulate you, first of all, with this important anniversary. Today is the Day of the United Nations, and the day is called United Nations Day. 70 years ago on this day, United Nations Charter came into effect, and Time magazine published a very interesting list of achievements that could be cause of celebration for the United Nations and for the entire world. And I'm going to just list these achievements. First is saving pyramids in Egypt, and then eradicating smallpox, protecting ozone layer, third one, helping save the lives of 90 million children, and promoting arms control. We should really celebrate these success stories with the community of the nations. And I understand you have important projects around the world, including Armenia, and very often international organizations providing valuable contribution to the member countries, especially in those countries that are called developing countries or countries with fledgling economies or troubled economies. As the head of the United Nations in Armenia, how would you describe our country, Armenia? Does it belong to the developing world, or is it ranked as poor country? What's your assessment of Armenia?
Well, thank you, first of all. Let me say thanks for having me here with Radio Liberty on such a momentous day for the United Nations. As you said, the 70th birthday party for the United Nations. I'm a huge fan and supporter of all the work that Radio Liberty is doing here in Armenia in terms of advocating and pushing media pluralism and media expression. So thank you, first of all. And then onto your question. Sure. Well, Armenia is still a young country, a young democracy, and therefore sort of a young economy. According to sort of official World Bank statistics, it's now moved into the middle income ranking of countries and economies, but of the lower middle income size. So certainly I would say it's a developing economy, and that makes sense given sort of the history of the republic and as I said, the sort of relative youth of the country and of the republic.
And Mr. Ambassador, I know that now you worked previously as a deputy head of the UN World Food Program, and you worked in critical areas of the world where there was emergency crisis, human tragedy caused by Mother Nature. So you have been helping in overcoming tsunami disaster, 2005, 2000. And do you see any looming danger in Armenia? I'm not talking about natural disasters, of course, but just economic disasters, maybe. How would you describe the economic situation in Armenia, and what kind of projects you have for Armenia to tackle the looming crisis in the economy?
Well, sure. There's certainly, as we just discussed, it's still a developing economy. There's still lots of work to do. If you think about what Armenia was like, say, 20 years ago, in the middle of a real crisis, in the middle of conflict, in the middle of war. The UN's role there was very, very different, right? We were providing life-saving humanitarian assistance, supporting the people, supporting the government, providing shelter and food assistance, and work like that. But now, Armenia has made a lot of progress. I think we can't forget that, especially in terms of its economy. But still, there are way too many poor people here. I think 1 out of every 3 people in Armenia are still classified as below the poverty line. And so a lot of our work in the UN here is focused on trying to create jobs, and trying to create jobs especially in rural areas where things are toughest and conditions are toughest. But we like to, it's hard to sort of pick out 2 or 3 priorities or let's say challenges. We like to think of, in UN language, the concept of sustainable development, where we're trying to promote an economy that's sustainable, that's green, that thinks about environmental concerns too and sustainable concerns, but it's also inclusive and includes all sectors of society. For example, much more inclusive of women in the economy and in society.
And Mr. Ambassador, I know that you are helping also agriculture in some countries that are having difficulties with it. Do we have any kind of project in Armenia that UN is implementing now, or it's underway now?
We do. We're supporting through the UN major initiatives in the agricultural sector, especially up in the north, up in Tavush region, Tavush Mars. And the idea there is to, well, we realize that agriculture here is still a huge employment driver. It makes up, I think, about 20% of the economy, but much more than that. I mean, probably double that in terms of the employment. And so anything we can do to make the agricultural sector more effective, the better. And so through our partners from both the Russian Federation and the European Union are funding different but somehow related programs on agricultural assistance to try to create these value chains and supporting, for example, fruit production, wine production, and many other sectors. And it's important to target areas up in the north because many of those villages too are the most vulnerable, I would say, to economic problems. Some of them are on the border areas with Azerbaijan where we're working. But if you can set up these value chains there and develop good products and then much more opportunity to sell those products, not just to the capital in Yerevan and across Armenia, but for example, up through Georgia and beyond.
Mr. Ambassador, in many bordering areas in Armenia, bordering with Azerbaijan, there are many villages that are, in fact, they are not, they cannot really do like agricultural work because of the situation on the bordering areas, as a conflict where Armenia is in the conflict with Azerbaijan or Nagorno-Karabakh, and you can see that there are a lot of violation of ceasefire in these areas, especially in Tavush region, and that you are working with. And villagers just complain that we cannot really go and take our harvest there, and they cannot really do anything there, and it just remains on the field. And whatever you have you have been doing, during the summer or spring, and you cannot really harvest them in autumn. So, do you have any program that can help these villagers, to collect their, harvest from the fields? Is it?
Sure. Well,
I'm sorry, Mr. Ambassador. For example, they asked Red Cross to come to help them. Under the Red Cross flag, they thought that they could do something, but actually the situation was so bad that even Cross-Red refused to go there because it was dangerous.
Yeah. I just visited that. Sure. I just visited that area myself just last week, as a matter of fact, to see firsthand the sort of situation on the ground. It's tricky in certain communities and certain villages and certain times of the year, and so we're trying to, well, obviously sort of at the higher level, the UN and our partners and around the world would appeal for certainly respect for the ceasefire and to absolutely stop any violations of across the border, and for the sake of the people there in these communities. But so certainly though we're aware of that, and so when we're developing our programs of agricultural development, of sort of economic stimulus in these villages, we're looking at ways in which we can first of all protect the lives of people there, and through perhaps developing greenhouses, introducing new economic opportunities beyond agricultural in some of these villages. But certainly aware of that and working on this.
And infrastructure in these villages especially are suffering the most. You know, actually, if they have any infrastructure, it's not functional because of the, you know, like no war, no peace situation in these areas. Is there any way that, you know, the villagers can overcome with the help of United Nations, with the help of other international organizations or the Armenian government? How would you advise? What's your, you know, best advice to overcome this situation? Do you have any recipe for this?
It's tough, but I think it's a challenge certainly. But I don't want to either diminish or overstate the problem there. It is only limited to a few communities there. Some of the infrastructure problems you've mentioned, but I think we need to work on ways together with the governments, with the NGOs that are working there. I'm not just talking about the national government, but local authorities to figure out ways in which we can both grow the economy in these places and try as much as possible to keep people in these villages, but keep these people in the villages and safe. I mean, obviously if they feel like they need to leave, then they should, but the goal is certainly to create a safe environment and create an environment that grows the economy. The most opportunity there is in the agricultural sector, but if you grow the economy, then the infrastructure, et cetera, will come with it. And there are opportunities around there. It's the most beautiful part of the country. It's one of the most beautiful parts, and so you can have, there are ideas around sort of ecotourism, for example, that could take place around there. But obviously, first you need security. You need security.
And Mr. Ambassador, there is everybody is talking now about one of the major problems that Armenian economy has is this artagaht, which is like immigration or you know, migration, yeah, to the other countries. The migration of the workforce and skilled workers from Armenia to Russia and other areas of former Soviet Union, and maybe also to the Western countries. And this is, you can also, the pace of this migration, when you look at the statistics, is staggering numbers. You see that Armenia is losing rapidly its population, and this could become like a social and economic disaster if the government or, you know, with the help of others, cannot stop this process. You have been also doing some statistics on this. You're following these trends. What's your take on it, please? Can you just share with us?
Sure, I agree. It's outward migration is a real issue in Armenia. Armenia is not alone facing this issue. There are other countries and other countries in this wider region that face this problem. But it is a problem. I think it's, to be honest, it's a problem not just of perceived lack of economic opportunities, but perhaps to some extent a sort of lack of feeling included in society, or that there are prospects for people in the future, and it's sort of to some extent a deeper issue. But on the other hand, you know, Armenians have always been fantastic travelers of the world and migrants, and have created economic opportunities and cultural wealth around the world through their travel. So, and that can create benefits too, and benefits also for the Republic of Armenia and the economy here back here. So it's a complicated question, and I think we have to tackle this from all sides, not just sort of making helping create the economy. To make the economy stronger, but also about how do we create a country that where people feel included and where people feel sort of social opportunities too. So we're working, I think, on all parts of that question, but again with the government and others. But I think it's important to mention about this return migration. There is some of that from Armenians from Armenia going out and then coming back, and which is good. And there are organizations like Repat Armenia here in Armenia that have an entire program of bringing people back from other parts of the world to help boost the economy here and bolster society here. We should also mention the influx of Syrian Armenians that have come over the last couple of years. Something like 17,000 Syrian Armenians now here. The UN has provided a lot of support to them. I mean, it's in support of the government, of course, with shelter and with rental subsidies, with job training, and I would say, I mean, it's only anecdotal evidence, but certainly that influx of Syrian Armenians have brought in this, to some extent, an economic impetus, this entrepreneurial spirit, and so I agree. Outward migration is a real problem, and it's important for, I think, the government to tackle it squarely, and I think that they are, you know, again, in collaboration with the UN and with all other partners working on this. The UN is, through the International Organization of Migration and other agencies, helping with, for example, to facilitate return migration of these people that are leaving, to make it easier for them to come back, and things like that. So it's a tough one, but it's tougher than but it's much more complicated, I think, than simply just the economy and lack of economic opportunity.
And of course, these migrants are really a great source of income for Armenia, and you know, the Armenian government is considering it as a you know, advantage that Armenia has, you know, that workers can go and come back. So I think they're just talking about this part of migration that is, you know, that has two ways. You know, they go for work and they come back. But we also witnessing lately that some of them, and you know, there's significant number of migrant workers that go there and stay there. They don't come back.
Yes.
And they even ask, they invite their families. And you know, that means that, you know, it is indication of their, you know, the motives, and you know, so they, seems to me they're not interested in coming back because of the you know, difficult situation in Armenia. Do you have also statistics on this, and are you following these trends as well?
Well, absolutely, we're following this closely, certainly, and I think that the statistics from the government are something like 35,000 people per year are leaving on a long-term basis. So, and your point about migrants that leave but then are supporting the economy back here, that's a good point. And as you said, remittances are something like 20% of the GDP here, which is a really high number. That's good in a sense. It's a good boost, but it also makes Armenia really vulnerable, right? Vulnerable to shocks to the economic system outside of Armenia. If you know, if there are economic problems in Russia, the effect here is almost instant because of this reliance on remittances. But so certainly, I mean, we you know, everyone who's concerned about the sustainable development of Armenia, including especially the UN, but the government and the civil society and any engaged citizen, I think we all have to think about, you know, our goal. You know, our goal together should be about, you know, how can we further create conditions where certainly people want to stay in this country and thrive in this country and grow their businesses and grow their families here.
So, Mr. Ambassador, are you also following this Armenia's association with the European Union? Now they're trying to sign some sort of lighter version of association agreement with EU. And on the other hand, Armenia is a member of Eurasian Economic Union. How do you think that this could benefit to the country? And is there any, as an economist, I don't know if you are economist by your training, but you are pretty knowledgeable. And would you just give us your short analysis? How would this play for Armenia? Being member of the Eurasian Union, at the same time getting closer to the European Union. Do you think that Armenia lost opportunity on September 3rd, 2013, when it turned down EU's offer, or you think Armenia had chosen right path?
Well, by training, I'm more of a philosopher by training than economist. But I will,
That's great.
I will try to reply to your question. Well, maybe, I think the key fundamental, maybe existential challenge for Armenia, in my view, personal view, really, is to stay integrated, stay linked and connected to the rest of the world. Armenia is a landlocked country. It's in a very complicated part of the world. It's not just sort of geographically landlocked, but to some extent politically, militarily constrained, obviously, as well. And so it's understandable that Armenia is reaching out to be connected in as many ways as possible, and absolutely understandable. That reaching out, of course, to the Eurasian Economic Union, reaching out to the European Union too. But I think that Armenia's neighbors and partners understand this, and hopefully will support Armenia to continue to be vibrant and grow and be connected. And one of the, just on this topic, one of the more unusual initiatives that the UN is working on here, it's not something we often do, but we're supporting the government in modernizing the borders between Armenia and Georgia. Normally we wouldn't get into sort of business like this, but it's the 3 border crossing points, Bargachashan and Gogovan and Bavra. And the reason we're doing that, because we feel it's very important, it's about this connectivity issue, the connection issue, the integration issue. How can Armenia be better linked with its neighbors? And that's a very important node or point between Armenia and Georgia, and then the rest now of Europe. So I just think, to answer that question shortly, I just think it's really important that Armenia is connected to as many integration processes as possible, really, to grow its economy and to be part of the larger world. And so it's understandable.
Mr. Ambassador, and I know that you are meeting with the Armenian officials, perhaps President, the Prime Minister, and you know also you have deep knowledge of the Armenia's economic problems as well. One of them is the monopolies in Armenia. Every economic activity has its big guy, and who controls certain field of economy. And this is being cited by many international organizations, including IMF and others, that this is a major problem for Armenia's economy. Are you also talking about sharing your concerns, if you have, of course, on this monopolized economy or a lack of competition on the ground in Armenia? Are you talking to the Armenian government about these issues?
Sure we are. Sure we're expressing our concerns. And maybe to put it in context, I mean, every country deals with corruption, and so Armenia's not alone. And I think recently you had the U.S. ambassador
yes.
in your studio, and you spoke about this. I'm also from the U.S., and again, in my country too, we certainly deal with corruption. It hits Armenia harder because it's as you said, it's still a developing economy, and it's a small country, and it's constrained, as we just discussed. It's just geopolitically, and so, of course, anything that the government can do, and anything that sort of we can do to support through anti-corruption measures are important, and we are seeing signs that there are some signs of positive measures now. The government has announced a very visible anti-corruption council and anti-corruption strategy, and we support this, and we certainly hope and believe that it's a very serious effort to crack down on this. So it's not directly related to your question, but I wanted to speak about for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Since we've talked a lot about the economy. One of the areas in which we're working on too, well, you know, the UN here focuses not just on implementing projects and creating jobs, but also in the level of advocacy and policy. We work on and focus a lot on governance and on human rights. And in one area in which we're working is supporting the rights of women and gender equality. And we've done that through helping draft legislation on gender equality, but also supporting women political leaders and women business leaders, especially in rural areas. So trying to create this change, well, of course, with local authorities and with the government, but the issue of gender equality, or the relative lack of it here in Armenia, it's not just, in our view, a human rights issue or a moral issue, but it's also lost economic. It's an economic issue. It's about lost economic opportunity. Let's talk again about these villages that we were just discussing, where a lot of people are leaving to other countries, and oftentimes it's mostly men that are leaving.
Yes.
And so many of these villages now are sort of disproportionately women, and if women are excluded from society and excluded from the economy in these villages, it just puts the villages at greater risk of economic decline and demographic decline. And so it's important, I think, and Armenia, I think, is getting this, and the society, the government are getting that this is an area where we should work together. And I just wanted to talk about that because I think it's important, as I said, not just in terms of sort of basic human rights,
yes,
but rather an economic issue.
Mr. Ambassador, and what is the most important one item that you will list as the major problem for Armenia's economy that should be fixed? If you see President Serge Sarkisian and he asks you about your advice, what would be that advice?
Major economic problem that needs to be fixed. Well,
you can also include, by the way, not only economic, but also all these issues that you are just talking about: human rights, democracy. And
I think, I think it's important to continue to set Armenia on a path of sustainable development, which means that how do we grow the economy, but by being inclusive, by including women, by including minorities. And there are some sort of green shoots. We see that the government, the authorities are very supportive of this whole concept of the green economy. For example, there are opportunities in energy efficiency and energy savings. Why is energy important? Energy is really important for Armenia because Armenia is almost completely energy dependent on outside sources. So Armenia can position itself as a leader in the green economy, but a green economy that's inclusive and includes women, and includes others. And so how do we do that? We do that by growing there are opportunities in the agricultural sector, for sure. There are opportunities linking agriculture to tourism. Armenia is just absolutely rich in terms of its cultural heritage and the tourist potential. So how do we develop that? The sort of southern corridors, the northern corridors. But I think that these are not sort of secret recipes. I mean, I think it's clear that the government and others know this, but it's a sort of complicated mix of developing both the social inclusion, but creating economic opportunities as well. And we all know that the tech sector, especially here, right here in the capital, in Yerevan, is something that Armenia can be really proud of, and that's another potential opportunity, not just within that sector and growing the economy, but how can we use technology to help create solutions to other problems? For example, making agriculture more efficient, creating tourism a possibility.
Yeah, Mr. Ambassador, you have so many. United Nations has many member countries, and in which there are different political systems, and we now Armenia is now on the path of changing its political system from presidential governing system to the parliamentary. Based on your experience at the UN and based on the experience of the many nations, including the Western countries, what do you think? Is it a good, path? Do you think that Armenia should go to the parliamentary system, or you think it's not necessary?
That I guess I wouldn't like to comment on which the UN or which I prefer between these two systems. It's really I think the key thing is that it needs to be the choice of Armenia, and especially the choice of the people. Certainly the parliamentary system is one that's been favored by many European countries and perhaps has a more balanced dynamic of authority and power than perhaps the presidential one. But it's certainly, I'm not in a position, I don't think the UN should be in a position to be choosing between one or the other, but I think the UN should definitely be advocating for public discussion about it and making sure that it's Armenia's choice and it's the Armenian people's choice.
And do you think that opposition is now able to openly express its opinion and to debate this, decisions and to influence these political decisions? What's your take on that? If you can, of course.
Yes. Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to get into the political discussions. The UN's role here is really a development role, not a political one. But again, I guess I would just express my hope that it's that whether it's the opposition parties or the public at large or civil society, that just as many people as possible can discuss it, and that it's a participatory process, I suppose.
Mr. Ambassador, I can remember just during the United Nations General Assembly, two high-level officials from Georgia, President and Prime Minister, wanted to address the United Nations. And this was a little bit, difficult situation. So Georgia is now like parliamentary country, and they have parliamentary system. And this was a situation when there was confusion over who is going to address the United Nations, President or Prime Minister. But, both of them went there. And you think it's okay?
Well, I guess that's more for our neighboring country to answer that question. But I guess the UN is an open house, and so that's a point that gets me to an important point I like to make. I mean, and that's one I like to always say here to people when I talk about the UN. We've talked a lot about UN projects here, but really, look, Armenia belongs to the UN. The UN belongs to Armenia. For me, it's more that what the UN does here, especially, it's more of sort of a system of partnerships, sort of an ecosystem. We help, to some extent, be a catalyst for change and a catalyst for more partnerships. That we don't have our own budget here, right? A lot of people are quite confused about that we think we're just this aid agency or something. But no, we work in partnership with bilateral government partners, for example, the European Union or the US or Austria or the Russian Federation and many others, but also with the private sector. And we work together to then provide not just projects that we've been talking about, especially these economic ones, but also policy advice to the government. And it's two-way traffic, it's a two-way flow, right? Armenia then also works very skillfully with the UN and through the UN to affect global processes. For example, the Sustainable Development Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals, Armenia played a really important and outsized role in that. And Armenia has a lot to say to the rest of the world too about, for example, energy efficiency. Armenia has a lot to say to the world about disaster preparedness, being in such a earthquake-prone zone. Armenia has developed world-class expertise and skills. So it goes both ways. Armenia contributes a lot to the UN, and I hope that the UN contributes a lot to Armenia here in this country.
And Armenians also have their, soldiers serving as peacekeepers, right? Yeah.
That's right. I should have mentioned. Thank you for mentioning that. But that's right. And again, this is in a way back to this notion of connectivity and connectedness. It's good that Armenia is playing a global role. It's very admirable and I think smart and strategic that Armenia is not just helping and assisting the rest of the world, but I hope also it reflects very well on Armenia. A country as small as Armenia still is contributing peacekeepers in Lebanon, now in Mali, and in other missions around the world, and putting their soldiers at risk. But I hope also gaining valuable experience too, and helping support themselves.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for coming to our studio, having time for us. So thank you very much. And I hope that we can talk about these issues in the future as well.
Thanks for the opportunity. I look forward to seeing you back here in Yerevan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.